Shabbat Shalom from under the dome. My name is Noel. I am here with Rob and Michael once again. This is the Diaspora of Yashar'el, a Sabbath group where we focus on Yahushua HaMashiach as our Messiah, but also Yahuwah, the Most High Elohim of Yashar'el, and his set-apart ways, which is the Torah. And we'll be hearing a lot about that tonight, I suspect, in a very special get-together or study on the Hebrew Epistle of YEHUDAH or Jude. I don't know if anybody else has ever done a study on the Hebrew Epistle of YEHUDAH, so this is really exciting. Just like in our last two studies we did on the Hebrew Revelation, what we call the confidential counsels of Yahuwah, as well as the Hebrew Gospel of Yochanan and John. You can always check those out if you're on YouTube land. And yeah, so let's just dive right into it. Rob, would you like to open us with prayer tonight?
Yes. Dear Father, we thank you for everything that you give and provide. You are the great I am. Father, may you bless this time that we have here in studying your word and discussing it. And may your Ruach be upon us. May you guide us in our words. And may we learn more and better understand you through these words. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen.
All right. Well, once again, welcome everybody. Some of you here is your first time. So we meet every 8 p.m. Eastern time at the end of Sabbath. And our theme verse around here, we just went through Revelation. Our theme verse is Revelation 14:12, which states that here is the patience of the set apart, the saints, those who keep the testimony of Yahushua as well as the commands of the Father. And so, again, we put a heavy focus on Yahushua HaMashiach. Of course, he's our Messiah, as well as his father Yahuwah. That he has these instructions in righteous living. We call that the Torah. Those are the commands that we are expected and asked to keep if we are to be set apart and walking on the narrow path. So with that, Rob, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you could read YEHUDAH chapter 1, or the only, I guess, really the whole book. Take it away.
Right. This is YEHUDAH, the Hebrew Gospel. YEHUDAH, a servant of Yeshua HaMashiach, but a brother of Yaakov, the sent one, to those set apart in Yahweh, the Father, and hidden in Yeshua HaMashiach. May Yahuwah give you much love and steadfast love and shalom and mercies. Beloved brothers, after I wanted to write to you about our set apartness, I found it needful to rebuke you by writing, that you should strengthen yourselves in the faith which was given to the set apart one. For some sons of man come in among them, of those who were already written up for this condemnation, and they were wicked ones, and invalidated the steadfast love of Yahweh in arrogance. And they did not believe in Yahweh and in his Mashiach. But I wanted to make you known that he who brought his people out of Mitzrayim killed those who did not believe 2 times. And also the messengers who sinned, and they were thrust down from above. They are being hidden in darkness until the future day of judgment. And also the places Sodom and Amorah, who likewise became a proverb and bore the fire of Gehinnom forever. And likewise those who despise the authority and curse the kingship. But the messenger Michael, while disputing with Hasatan because of the grave of Moshe, did not even curse him so, but said to him, Hadon condemns you. But these people curse while they know nothing, and also what they do know they despise. And woe to them, for they are walking on the road of Canaan, and falling into the temptation of Balaam, because of some profit and are being killed because of the dispute of the Korah. And they are prideful with your gifts, and they are as clouds without water, which go with the wind, and trees that do not bear fruit, as the waves of the sea that throw out mire and mud. And Enoch, the seventh from Adam, also prophesied about this, and said, Look, Ha'adan will come with thousands of thousands, 10,000s of set apart ones, to execute judgment on the wicked ones because of their evil deeds. For there is no firmness in his mouth. Their inside is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. But you, beloved brothers, you must remember the word which was said from the beginning by the sent ones of our Adon, Yeshua HaMashiach, that they said to you that in the last days there will be scoffers beside you, who will walk after their desires. These are in the flesh and not in the Ruach. But you, beloved brothers, strengthen yourselves in your faith by the Ruach HaKodesh, and stand in the love of Yahuwah, and wait for the mercies of our Adon Yeshua for eternal life. And also you yourselves must be merciful. Indeed, some of you are with good deeds, but keep a distance from the sinners. But he who is able to keep you without doubting and to set you before Ha'adam without any sin, to him be honor and glory and kingship from everlasting and unto everlasting. Amen. That is all of Jude, chapter 1. I'll pass it over to Michael for commentary.
That's only chapter 1, Rob? Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. As Noel said, I hope we don't steal each other's thunder today. This is a lot to go over, though. So even if we do, it'd be good to hear everybody's perspective. So first, I want to start off that Jude 1:1. He identifies himself as the brother of James. So that means he probably was not the apostle named Jude, who was called the son of James, Luke 6:16. And then I was doing a lot of research, and you'll see many similarities between 2 Peter, mainly chapter 2, and Jude. So much that most scholars agree that either one letter used the other directly, or they both drew from a common source. So I saw someone did the study, and they compared the Greek text versions of 2 Peter 2 through 3:3, which was 426 words, to Jude, verse 4 through 18, 311 words. That resulted in 80 words in common and 7 words of substituted synonyms. So you're going to see a lot of similarities between 2 Peter and Jude today. I'm going to start out with number 1, reading the Hebrew. It says, YEHUDAH, a servant of Yeshua HaMashiach, but a brother of Yaakov, sent one to those set apart in Yahweh, the Father, and hidden in Yeshua HaMashiach. So as I said earlier, Jude was a blood relative of Yeshua, but he considered himself only as a bondservant. That's amazing. It shows how humble he was and how we should be. This guy was literally, the brother of the Messiah, and considered himself a bondservant. That's the first thing. Number 3, I'm going to read both because there's a lot of interesting differences. So in the Greek it says, Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that ye should earnestly contend for the faith, which was once delivered unto the saints. And in the Hebrew it says, Beloved brothers, after I wanted to write to you about our set apartness, I found it needful to rebuke you by writing that you should strengthen yourselves in the faith, which was given to the set apart ones. So the obvious one is, our common salvation. And then in the Hebrew it says about our set apartness. That's so different. If you know me personally, one of my pet peeves is that the totality of salvation hasn't happened yet. That's for the resurrection. And if you're reading this in the Greek, you just read it, you're saved. Right? It's just our common salvation. I'm with Jude here. But in the Hebrew, it says about our set apartness. That's such a huge difference in my opinion. And it because the Greek, that doesn't show you how to be set apart. The Hebrew tells you need to be. The second part that's different, it says, in the Greek it says you should earnestly contend for the faith, where in the Hebrew it says strengthen yourself in the faith. Again, I just think it's more Hebrew, strengthening yourself in the faith instead of earnestly contend. You can take it many ways that you're earnestly contending, but strengthen is kind of straightforward there. And then finally, saints and set apart ones. Saints, again, can go many different ways. There's many people throughout these decades and centuries that have called themselves saints. Hebrews says set apart ones. So this is not my study, but I heard it through a YouTube channel here, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I'm not sure it's 100%, but the Greek word for saints is hagios, H-A-G, E-E-O-S. It comes from the Hebrew word chag, C-H-A-G, H-2282. So on a holy day, you would say Chag Samiach, joyous festival, as in happy festival. So basically what it's saying is if you are a saint, Greek hagios, then you partake in the feasts, because that's where they got it from. So hagios and hag, like Pentecost and Shavuot, C-H-A-G, and hagios for the saints is H-G-E-O-S. I thought that was pretty cool. Saints and set apart ones. If basically what this study said is if you want to be a saint, you need to do you're a feast keeper. Number 4, I'll read the Hebrew. For some sons of men came in among them, of those who are already written up for this condemnation. And they were wicked ones, and invalidated the steadfast love of Yahweh in arrogance. And they did not believe in Yahweh and his Mashiach. There's many different differences. I'm just going to state one of them. So in the Hebrew, it says that they invalidated the steadfast love of Yahweh in arrogance. But in the Greek, it says lasciviousness. And the definition of that is unbridled lust, excess, wantonness, outrageousness, shamelessness, insolence. I don't know. I think the Hebrew does a better makes a better point in that verse. My first 2 Peter cross reference today would be number 1. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. So that's, like I was saying in the Greek, very similar. So if certain men crept in unaware, who were before of old, turning the grace of Yah into lasciviousness, where in 2 Peter it says, but false prophets also arose among you, and false teachers among you. So it's basically, that's what I was saying at the very beginning, where, the point is very similar in both. Number 5, I'm going to read the Hebrew. But I want to make you known that he who brought his people out of Mitzrayim killed those who did not believe 2 times. So Jude here reminds us of what happened in Numbers 14. Yah delivered the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. They went out of Egypt and with unintended delays came to a place called Kadesh Barnea, on the threshold of the promised land. So they didn't enter it. So at Kadesh Barnea, the people refused to trust Yah and go into the promised land of Canaan. Therefore, almost none of the adult generation who left Egypt entered the promised land. That should worry people. Just because he redeemed you, they didn't make it into the promised land. So we should continue in our faith to the end, as our own Messiah tells us to do. Strong's word for destroyed. So I didn't read that, but I'll summarize. It says, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believeth not. So that Strong's word for destroyed is apolisin. So it's used 2 other times in the New Testament, and both times it's talking about the day of the Lord's coming in Luke 17, and it's also the parable of the marriage feast. So I'll read the marriage feast first in Matthew 22. Everybody knows the story. I'll read some of it. But the king was enraged, and he sent his armies and destroyed same word, those murderers, and set their city on fire. Then he said to his slaves, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main highways, and as many as you find there, invite to the wedding feast. So he destroyed his initial guests, if you recall the story. And then we also in the day of the Lord's coming in Luke 17:26, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So again, this is a similar pattern here where Yah destroys people. And I gave you two examples in the New Testament as well. Two more, but they're long, so stay with me here. Number 6 in the Hebrew, and this might be some thunder stealing, but I can't help it. Everybody's going to be talking about Enoch, guys. So I'm going to read the Hebrew. And also the messengers who sinned and were thrust down from above, they are being hidden in darkness until the future day of judgment. Messengers are also angels. They left their first estate, as the Greek says. Now, I thought this was pretty cool. Genesis 6, Jude 6, and Enoch 6 all talk about the fallen angels. There's your 666. I'm going to read some of the Enoch. Everybody knows the Gen 6 verse. I just read you the Jude 6 verse. I'll read you some of the Enoch verse. So, number 2, and the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them, and they said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the children of men, and let us beget for ourselves children. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us swear an oath, and bind one another with curses, so not to alter this plan, but to carry out this plan effectively. Then they all swore together and all bound one another with curses to it. And they were in all 200, and they came down on Ardis, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they swore and bound one with a curse. And then it goes on to naming them. I'm not going to do that, but I will put it in the chat. Different names of the angels. Okay, so I'm going to read some extra biblical books also talking about giants. So Baruch 3:24, O Israel, how great is the house of Yah, and how vast the territory that he possesses. It is great and has no bounds. It is high and immeasurable. Praise Yah. The giants were born there, who are famous of old, great in stature, expert in war. Yah did not choose them, nor give them the way of knowledge, so they perished because they had no wisdom. They perished through their folly. So that's Baruch 3:24-28. It says, it's talking about the New Jerusalem. The giants were born there, and because they had no wisdom. Sirach 16:6. The Lord's flaming anger will break out against a small gathering of sinners or a disobedient nation. He did not forgive those ancient giants who rebelled against him, confident in their own strength. Wisdom of Solomon 14:6. For even in the beginning, when arrogant giants were perishing, the hope of the world took refuge on a raft, and guided by your hand left to the world the seed of a new generation. For blessed is the wood by which righteousness comes. I love that last part. Okay, so back to the Greek on number 6. It talks about the angels left their first estate, or they didn't keep their first estate and left their own habitation. So the Strong's word for habitation is okiterion, and the definition is habitation, dwelling place, abode. It's only used one other time, and that is 2 Corinthians 5. And I thought that was pretty cool. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from Yah, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven. That word dwelling is the same word as habitation. So we're longing to be going back to the paradise. So it's basically saying the angels left the place where we are going, the New Jerusalem. Okay, so this is my last note, but it is pretty long. Number 7. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Read the Hebrew. And also the places Sodom and Gomorrah, who likewise became a proverb and bore the fire of Gehinnom forever. So in the Hebrew, it doesn't give a description of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Greeks stated, and the cities about them later, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh. That's huge. That's a big difference. Why wouldn't the Hebrew admit that? So, Sodom and Gomorrah, or they're also called the cities of the plain, I was reading about that, then it kind of clicked that I think the Hebrew Revelation talked about that. The cities of the plain or streets of the plain or something have been used historically and in modern discourse as metaphors for homosexuality. That's what the Greek says, right? Fornication, going after strange flesh. But I want to read a few descriptions of Sodom and Gomorrah and show that it's way more than that. Way more than that. So Isaiah associates Sodom with shameless sinning and tells Babylon that will end like those two cities. Jeremiah and Lamentations associate Sodom and Gomorrah with adultery and lies. It prophesied the fate of Edom and predicts the fate of Babylon and uses Sodom as a comparison. Ezekiel compares Jerusalem to Sodom, saying, "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom, pride, fullness of bread." That probably means money. They didn't go hungry. "Careless ease was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me." So it's also taking care of the poor. It's way more than just homosexuality. In Amos, Yah tells Israel that although he treated them like Sodom and Gomorrah, they still did not repent. You can still repent. In Zephaniah tells Moab and Ammon that they will end up like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now this one I love. This is Wisdom of Solomon 10. I highly recommend reading it. That chapter. Wisdom rescued a righteous man when ungodly were perishing. He escaped the fire that descended on the 5 cities. 2 angels, 5 cities. Evidence of their wickedness still remains, a continually smoking wasteland, plants bearing fruit that does not ripen, and a pillar of salt standing as a monument to an unbelieving soul. For because they passed wisdom by, they not only were hindered from recognizing the good, but also left for mankind a reminder of their folly, so that their failures can never go unnoticed. Sirach says, Yah did not spare the neighbors of Lot, whom he loathed on account of their insolence, which is rude or disrespectful behavior. In 3rd Maccabees, the high priest Simon says that Yah consumed with fire and sulfur the men of Sodom who acted arrogantly, who are notorious for their vices, and you made them an example to those who should come afterwards. Finally, 2nd Ezra describes the signs of the end times, one of which is that the sea of Sodom shall cast up fish. And also, Ezra says that Abraham prayed for the people of Sodom. So that's very humble to do that. We should be doing that. Finally, last word study, and I'll hand off to Noel. Back to the Greek, the Strong's word for vengeance. So let me try to find it. So, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So that Strong's word for vengeance is diken, D-I-K-E-N, and it's also used in 2 Thessalonians 1, starting on 5. So this is a plain indication of Yah's righteous judgment, so that you will be considered worthy of the kingdom of Yah, for which indeed you are suffering. For after all, it is only just for Yah to repay with affliction those who afflict you, and to give relief to those who are afflicted, and to us as well, when Yeshua will be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, dealing out retribution to those who do not know Yah, and to those who do not obey the gospel. These will pay the penalty of eternal destruction. That same word, destruction, is the same as vengeance, away from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his power. Before I hand it off to Noel, I think it does an amazing summary. And it also says, those who do not obey the gospel. You should want to, if the gospel is only some construct thought in your head, I don't know, you might want to rethink your gospel. So I hope you enjoyed it. I did take a line, but I will split it here and hand it off to Noel. Thank you.
I'm amazed that we even have this letter. And I'm not even talking about the Hebrew for the moment. I'm talking even about the Greek. There are 66 books that were selected for canon, and Jude or YEHUDAH was chosen amongst them. Why was it chosen? I've asked myself that question for probably 20 years now, and I'll maybe get a little bit into why I've asked that question. One of the things to consider is, was this a one-off for YEHUDAH? Did he write no other letters? Now, hopefully next week we're going to be reading from the Epistle, the letter of Yaakov, which is, in my opinion, is a masterful letter. It's many people's favorite book of the Bible. There is no possible way that Yaakov wrote that one letter and go, okay, I'm done. I'm good. That was, that's my magnum opus. I did it on the first try. I've never written any letters before, but this is it. And here you go, canon people, put this on the shelf, and Constantine put this into the Bible. And so you would think that Yaakov, as well as Yehuda, wrote other letters. Why did only one survive for both? My guess is, and we've been talking about this a lot over the last few months, when Yerushalayim was destroyed in 70 AD, we know for a fact that the church of Yerushalayim fled. They crossed the Jordan River over to modern Jordan, kind of the Petra area, and they were hanging out there. And then that church goes into oblivion. We've talked about the reasons why that is. And the thing is that when Yehuda writes this letter, as well as Yaakov, I bring in Yaakov here because they're brothers, obviously. They weren't thinking, like, you read this letter, like, it was not in his line of thinking of, like, I'm writing a book of the Bible right now. This is going to go in, into the New Testament, after the letters of Paul, right before Revelation or wherever it's positioned. There's no way he's thinking that. And I think that when they fled Yerushalayim, almost all of their work was destroyed with them. Like, they had to leave everything behind. Yahusha gave strict instructions: don't even go back for a cloak, just get out of there. I think they hightailed it. They ran. They didn't go back for this stuff. They didn't go back for their library. It was destroyed. We lost tons of stuff. So I state that because we have 13 letters from Shaul. He was not in Jerusalem, right? Yaakov and Yehuda were. And that's why I say it's really a miracle that we have this book. And I'll talk a little bit more about the book itself. I remember a discussion I had with my father about 15 years ago where I was analyzing Jude and questioning why it was in Scripture. It came across to me at the time like Cliff Notes. Actually, I still kind of hold that. I don't really believe this. This may be controversial for some. Others, you're not even going to think twice about it. I don't see this book as, if we're going to define Scripture as Holy Spirit breathed, then I would not define this book as Scripture. I would define Revelation as such. I would define the Gospel of Matthew as such. This, I think, is some dude. He's not just a dude. He's the brother of Yaakov, but he's literally just writing a letter, probably to his congregation in Jerusalem. It comes across to me like Cliff Notes, which I'll describe in a second. There's not a lot. What I'm saying is there's not a lot of original content here. What was he truly saying? Well, I've come to appreciate Jude much more in recent years. First with the flat Earth revelation back in 2015. Unfortunately, what I came to love about this book is no longer in this book. He does quote from Enoch, but whoever translated this, and I do believe, I think that this book, what we're seeing, predates the Greek. I've had some questions about some other things. I think this predates the Greek. And clearly, whoever translated this book into the Greek was probably a lover of Enoch, because he flourishes. He added some extra flourishes there, which we'll get into a little bit. And also, I think that also answers Michael's question about why the Hebrew epistle doesn't talk about the strange flesh or homosexuality of Sodom and Gomorrah. I think to the Hebrew thinkers, they weren't thinking in terms of homosexuality. That, for me, it is true that there were homosexuals there and that was an abomination, but it can also be big misdirection, because the church uses this to say, like, oh, look at the city of San Francisco. They're like Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's like, actually, no. When you do a study, and Michael did a phenomenal job at it, when you do a study on what Sodom and Gomorrah was, it was breaking Torah. It was complete contempt towards the law of heaven. And it was creating a human law that in order to obey that law, you had to disobey the law of heaven, the Torah. And the book of Jasher does a phenomenal job at that as well. So he wasn't even thinking in terms of homosexuality. I almost think that the person who translated this into the Greek, he was trying to give context, because, the people would go like, what's Sodom and Gomorrah? It's like, oh, they were homosexuals. Oh, okay, that makes sense. He destroyed the city of homosexuals. All right, so anyways, now some of that has gone out of there, but I've again learned to appreciate this in our quote unquote New Testament section of the Bibles in total new ways. And we'll get into that. All right. So in as little as one chapter, YEHUDAH mentions at least 10 events from the Old Testament. I'll go through them real quick. There could be more, but this is what I numbered. We see the faith of obedience given to the saints. That was an event. We see people brought out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. That was an event. That we call that the Exodus. We see the unbelievers destroyed twice. So technically that could make that 11 events. I clumped that into one. There are 2 times where YEHUDAH destroyed the people for their disobedience. We see that the angels that sinned were judged. That's the 4th. Number 5, Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. Number 6, Moses' burial. Number 7, Cain and Abel. Number 8, Balaam tempted by prophet. Number 9, rebellion of Korah. Number 10, Enoch prophesied. Interestingly enough, I should note that there are 2 extra biblical, what we would call extra biblical, outside of canon books mentioned here that are all revolved around Torah. One is the angels that were judged. That specifically, in my opinion, comes from Enoch. Yes, it is in Genesis 6, but we don't see the judgment that he's talking about specifically mentioned in Genesis 6. It is very clear in Enoch, and also at Moshe's burial with Michael and Hasatan. That comes from a book that we don't really have anymore, The Ascension of Moses. So it's kind of interesting how he's lumping these 2 events into, not only these 2 events into Torah, but also, as Michael has commented, there is a lot in common with 2 Peter. And when he gets to it, 2 Peter quotes it differently, but when we get to it with YEHUDAH, he actually is. He tells you he's quoting from a source. We don't have that source anymore. Maybe we do, and I totally missed it. I botched it. I was looking, I'm like, where does this source exist? It's gone. And I've commented on this multiple times that there are so many books that are completely gone now. It is my theory that Genesis was Moses writing Genesis as well as the writer of Jasher were not sourcing from each other. They were sourcing from a book, a common book that is gone from us now. And I think there was a whole bunch of that, and including probably books written by Adam and some others. All right, so we see those 10 events in here in one chapter. And there is a point to all of this. Then we see there are 9 persons mentioned in here that I counted. They are YEHUDAH. Now, that's a big one because in the Greek, he's never mentioned. We hear Dias, or you could say God, or Elohim, but his name has been stripped out. I counted, I think, 5 times that they stripped his name out in one chapter, in one letter. It's gone 5 times. So we see that restored in the Hebrew, which is really awesome to see. So that's one person, YEHUDAH. We see Michael, the archangel. We see Hasatan. We see Moshe, Cain, Balaam, Korah, Enoch, and Adam. And then we see 4 places. We see Egypt, Sodom, Gomorrah, and Gehenna. All right. And all right, so think about that, and I'm going to touch base back on that and the importance of these events in the context of this letter in what we call, quote unquote, the New Testament. Now, in verse 1, I found this really interesting. It says that Yaakov, he called him the sent one. He didn't call him James the just. He called him the sent one. Let me read the Greek again. I don't think he calls him anything like that. He just says, Jude, the servant of Jesus Christ, the brother of James. All right. And then in the Hebrew, he says a brother of Yaakov, the sent one. So I thought that was really interesting. And I'm not reading the Hebrew in front of me. Ronit is in here tonight. She might be. And I would be interested to see if the word is malak in Hebrew, which could mean messenger or angel. Okay. So if I'm correct on my hunch, YEHUDAH is calling his brother Yaakov an angel or a messenger. Clearly, Yaakov was the leader of the Church of Jerusalem. And all right, so I just lost my thought on that. But oh yeah, so that carries us over to Revelation. And we read about in chapters 1 through 3 the angels of the churches, the messengers. And the idea is that these are the pastors, the leaders of these churches. He's not saying that Yaakov is actually a spiritual entity from heaven. He's calling him a messenger. And that actually plays into this this letter considerably. Another thing that I noticed here in verse 1 is that he only calls himself the brother of Yaakov. Michael touched on this. He does not refer to himself as a brother of YEHUDAH. Now, this kind of plays into what we were talking about last Thursday night when we read from another book, and a big discussion came up, kind of controversial, on whether or not Miriam, the mother of YEHUDAH, had any other children. It is my personal belief, my conclusion, that she had no other children, that all brothers and sisters of YEHUDAH were through Joseph's former marriage. And I get that not from tradition, not from oral tradition, not because I am not Catholic, but simply because all these books that I have read that have stated that black and white, it's pretty clear in all these books that didn't make it into canon, but have some great historical reference to it. So I don't want to make a big point of that, but I do find that interesting that he doesn't say, hey, I'm also the brother of Messiah. Let's see, what else do I have here in verse 1? Oh, he is writing to the set apart. Now, in the Greek, and Michael touched on this too, the Greek uses the word, or at least in the King James, it says, to them that are sanctified. And that is a theological word right there, sanctification. And that is a weighty word. Depending on who you talk to, they have many different views on that word sanctification. So let me see if I can do a definition here. And by the way, in verse 1, it's sanctified past tense. All right. There's a lot of flipping here between past and present tense in this letter, going back and forth. And he doesn't use it past tense in the Hebrew. He's talking about being set apart present. He's writing this to you if you are set apart, not sanctified in the past, but you are presently set apart. So sanctification, this is the way it can be defined: the action of making or declaring something holy, the action or process of being freed from sin or purified. And this is, for those of you who have done your Protestant Reformation, studies, sanctification is really really weighty. I'll just kind of leave that there, that word is gone. And what we're going to start seeing here is he talks about Torah. It is exclusively here. He doesn't have any Protestant Reformation in his thinking. He's not all this theological mumbo jumbo about the fact that we like all of our sin has been placed onto YEHUDAH, therefore you can't sin anymore, and this kind of stuff. Again, it depends on who you talk to, because there could be 100 different very in-depth theological thinkers thinking to this and be like, no, you have this wrong, and they all have it they would all, of course, disagree with each other, depending on who you talk to. So that's why I don't want to go too much into that right now. But there's a difference in verse 2 then. We see in the Greek it talks about actually, it doesn't say it in verse 2. What does he say? Oh, verse 3. I got that wrong. In verse 3, in the Greek, he talks about, I write unto you of the common salvation. Well, what do you mean? What does that mean, common salvation? But then we see, again, in the Hebrew, he talks about set apartness, being set apart from the world. And so, people can argue all they want about, they're already saved, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, are you set apart, though? People will say, well, no, I'm set apart in Jesus. It's like, well, I know YEHUDAH is set apart. I know he is. But does that make you set apart? Just because you believe he's set apart? No, that doesn't work like that. That's not even in the mindset of these Hebrew thinkers, that just because you believe Messiah is set apart does not make you set apart. Just because you believe that he died and resurrected, that does not make you set apart. You can go eat pork and you are not set apart. It doesn't work that way. All right. So this was one of the if I'm reading this letter right, this is one of the big bombshells, and this is why I said that I've had a kind of a new appreciation for this. In verse 4, the Hebrew reads differently. Once again, the Hebrew reads differently throughout this whole letter. But the changes are almost more glaring than any other book we've read so far. Rather than people creeping in unaware at present, the Greek seems to insinuate that they're at present, there are people creeping in unaware that he needs to warn you about. Well, the Hebrew version of Jude discusses unbelievers in Old Testament times, while the Greek discusses unbelievers in New Testament times. Again, you're seeing like whoever translated this, I believe he didn't really seem to have that appreciation for the Torah. He was kind of maybe trying to update it for his contemporary use. But this is what it says in the Greek. For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men turning the grace of our God into, or I'll say of our Elohim, into lavishness, and denying the only Adonai Elohim, which they rip out Yahuwah, and our Adonai Yahushua HaMashiach. Well, this is what it says in the Hebrew. For some sons of man came in among them. He's not talking about us or his congregation. He's talking about them. Well, who's them? He's talking about the wilderness generation, and really Torah. But he's talking about a past event. Now, this has changed dramatically. I'll say right here, because about 2 years ago, I wrote a whole article on Jude as theorizing that he was talking about the congregation of Shaul. That there was some friction in theology and doctrines between his camp and the camp of Yerushalayim, and I was using this book as evidence. I can't do that anymore because I'm not. No, he could be, exhorting some and warning others about some events that happened in the past happening presently. But he's just not saying that here. It just changes, and I really want to point that out in the language use. Now, it is interesting. Again, I don't want to take too much of Rob's time. I'm going to jump back to him. I have so many notes on this, guys. It really is interesting that you see some very common themes in the New Testament with the 40 years in the wilderness. They wandered 40 years to the wilderness before they came to the Promised Land. Same thing happens from the death and resurrection of Yahusha up until the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and there was exactly 40 years in between. And you see, Balaam coming and leading people to sin. You see Balaam showing up in Revelation. You see him showing up in Jude, and you see all these things happening that are there's very similar events. So that is to be taken note of, but. There's one other thing that I picked up before I hand it over to Rob. There's one other thing I picked up in verse 4 that blew my mind. If you can recognize that he's not talking about present tense, because I grew up with this idea that there was something that the New Testament was different than the Torah, because we no longer needed to obey Torah. Now we just needed belief in Yahushua HaMashiach, and that nobody believed in him before that. All of a sudden he shows up, and then people had to believe him. And if you didn't believe him, you're going to hell. And you didn't have to even be obedient. You just needed to believe him. Beforehand, they had to be obedient, and they didn't have to believe him. That was the most weird, thinking that, but that's what I was taught. I was raised. And I think most Christianity believes that way. Well, again, so if you recognize in verse 4 that he says, for some sons of a man came in among them, not his congregation, but back in Torah, then look how it ends in the ending of the verse. The steadfast love of Yahuwah in arrogance, and not his congregation, they did not believe in Yahuwah and his Mashiach. I want that, just let that sink in here, guys. Here we have a reference where he's saying that the people who were rebelling in ancient times, in Torah, in Genesis and Exodus, all the way through Deuteronomy, and even afterwards, they did not believe in his Mashiach, his anointed one. Now, that can be taken a few different ways that we'll look at in here. I think it's a direct reference to Yahushua HaMashiach. And what I'm going to do here is, without diverting too much from this study tonight, I am going to be referring to some passages in the Aramaic Targum. I really do enjoy the Aramaic Targum. I believe that it predates Yahusha, and that it was written, it was not oral, which brings up a lot of problems if Yahusha is telling his followers to listen to the Pharisees when they speak from the seat of Moses, because they're reading the written word. And here's some of the things we see in here, that some of the belief systems, and this is also why I believe that the Aramaic Targum was written beforehand. There's no way this was written afterhand. There's no possible way. So here's what we read in Exodus 14, verse 31. And Israel saw the power of the mighty hand by which Yahuwah had wrought the miracles in Mizraim in Egypt. And the people feared before Yahuwah and believed in the name of the word of Yahuwah and in the prophecies of Moshe his servant. We again see in the next chapter, Exodus 15, when the people of the house of Israel beheld the signs and manifestations which the Holy One, whose name be praised, had done at the Red Sea, at the Sea of Sup, and the power of his hand, the children of the captives answering said one to the other, come and let us set the crown of majesty on the head of our Redeemer. Who's the Redeemer? Who maketh to pass over and passeth not, who changeth and is not changed, whose is the crown of the kingdom, the King of kings in this world, whose too is the kingdom and the world to come forever and ever. Actually, I didn't write down the next verse, but they say it's the name of the word of Yahuwah. And we see here in Genesis chapter 40, blessed shall be the man who trusteth in the name of the word of Yahuwah, and who confideth and whose confidence is the word of Yahuwah. So here we see, even in the Old Testament times, they had to put their trust in the name of the word. We see in Genesis chapter 22, and Abraham prayed in the name of the word of Yahuwah and said, thou art Yahuwah who seeth and art not seen. And so he's praying unto the name. So that goes back into all the way into Genesis. Here's another one from Genesis 18. And I will bring food of bread that you may strengthen your hearts and give thanks in the name of the word of Yahuwah. So when you pray, you give thanks in the name of the word. Here's one from Song of Songs, chapter 7. Return to me, O assembly of Israel. Return to Jerusalem. Return to the house of instruction of the law. That would be the Torah. Return to receive prophecy from the prophets who prophesied. The prophets are prophesying in the name of the word of Yahuwah. I got a couple more here I want to read. I found so many. There's no way I could read them all tonight, but I just want to give you a sense of the fact that I believe that these were ripped out of Scripture. I think that they deleted the fact that Yahusha is all through the Old Testament, belief in him, which is what Jude is talking about. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 29. Happy are you, O Israel, who of all the nations are like you, a people saved in the name of the word of Yahuwah. Well, that's interesting. So they're saved in the name of the word. And what is his name? Yeshua, salvation, right? They're saved in Yeshua. Exodus 34, and Yahuwah revealed himself in the cloud of glory of his Shekinah, and Moshe stood with him there, and Moshe called on the name of the word of Yahuwah. And one last one, Psalms 118, 26. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the word of Yahuwah. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it back. I have tons of more notes to go through here tonight. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Rob.
All right, thank you, Noel. I think you were only on what, verse 5, 6? That was excellent. I loved it.
Verse 4.
Yeah.
Chapter 3 there.
All right. You guys covered a lot of good stuff, so it knocked out some things on me. So I want to share. I'm going to share a couple of things I want to talk about. I'm going to drop here in the chat a slide that I want to talk on regarding YEHUDAH. And I'll start with this, is that when I read YEHUDAH and what he's saying here in this book or this scroll, this writing, it's been mainly a warning and rebuke to his brethren. And as you guys already mentioned, who YEHUDAH is, etc. He's writing to more or less the believers, the brethren. So in the very beginning here, what I wanted to point out is when he addresses it in verse 1 to the set apart in Yahweh the Father and hidden in Yeshua HaMashiach, or concealed in Yeshua HaMashiach. So I thought that was interesting the way he worded that. That to those set apart in Yahweh the Father and concealed in Yeshua HaMashiach. So he's describing those who are set apart in that sense. And then, as Michael and Noel read, I'm just going to read this quickly, and I want to point out, more or less I summarize here in the writings. He writes, I found it needful to rebuke you by writing that you should strengthen yourselves in the faith, which was given to the set apart ones. Once again, he's saying that the set apart ones should be strengthening themselves in the faith. Okay? And there's a reason why he's saying that, because he's going to then go into the warnings about the wicked ones and the sons of men that come in and invalidate the steadfast love of Yahweh. So he's telling us to strengthen ourselves, because the wolves will come in and they will lead people away. Because it says here, for some sons of men come in among them, of whom you were already written up for the condemnation, and they were wicked ones. So there's two sets of people here, in my opinion. The sons of man consist of two sets of people: wicked ones and those who aren't necessarily wicked, but they are prideful and arrogant. And they come in thinking they know what they know, they have knowledge, and they are invalidating the steadfast love of Yahweh by preaching something else. And then, of course, you have the wicked ones that are coming in, who are doing also the same thing with the wrong intentions, knowing they're doing it that way. So I want to point that out. And then he says here, but I want to make you known, I want to make you known that he who brought his people out of Mitzrayim killed those who did not believe 2 times. From what I understand, that 2 times would be referencing when they're in the wilderness. From what I understand, that 2 times is referencing, and we can talk about afterwards. If anyone else sees that as anything else, I'd be interested. And then once again here in verse 15, Yahweh will execute judgment on the wicked ones because of their evil deeds. So once again, he warns, does another warning on the wicked ones, what's going to happen. And then my last slide, I'll drop and I'll talk about, and then I'll pass it over to Michael. And I do have commentary on differences between the Hebrew and the Greek. I know Noel and Michael's hit a lot of them, but I still got a few in there that I want to address, and I'll wait till the last go around. But here is more warnings that we are seeing that YEHUDAH is presenting. He's telling us once again, this is verses 17 to 25. You must remember the word which was said from the beginning by the sent ones. From the beginning by the sent ones. These are the prophets, the people who are, Moshe, etc., that are writing these things down, of our Adonai Yeshua HaMashiach. They said, in the last days, there will be scoffers. They will be walking after their own desires. And these are in the flesh and not in the Ruach. So he's given us some more examples to be aware of, and that is why we must strengthen our faith so we are not led away or discouraged by the scoffers. Okay? And then here we got 5 things he's telling us to do. those who are his beloved brothers, the believers. Strengthen yourselves in your faith by the Ruach HaKodesh. That's one. And then stand in the love of Yahweh. That's two. And then three, be watchful for the mercies of our Adon Yeshua for eternal life. So we must be watchful. We must always be watchful. We can't be lazy. We can't be slothful. We must always be on guard and walking in obedience and obeying and loving his ways. Four, we must be merciful. So we must show mercy. And five, stay away from the sinners. So that is another key part. I know I've seen mainstream Christianity more or less open their doors to the sinners, welcome them in, make them feel comfortable, etc. And there is something to that as far as opening your doors, but you must be preaching the truth and not watering it down in order to come to their level. But we must be bringing them to ours and being done in a loving way in that sense. And then lastly here, honor and glory and kingship from everlasting and unto everlasting is to those who are able to keep from doubting. He who sets you before Ha'adam without any sin. So honor and glory comes to those who can be set before Adonai without any sin and without any doubt. So we must have strengthened faith, no doubting in our faith, and we must walk in righteousness, in repentance, in righteousness, and in love. So I think that Yehudah makes it very clear, giving us this warning, this rebuke, this direction. That's what I wanted to pull out of this before I go into some of the other points that we've been talking about. So I wanted to share that for people to see, understand, make sure they can see this and review this themselves. And then I'll pass this over to Michael, and when it comes back around to me, I'll point out some more things that I found, unless, of course, Michael and Noel covers them in the next go around here. So, Michael, I hand it off to you.
Awesome stuff, both of you guys. That was a great segue, too, for what I'm going to talk about doubting. And Noel's still a little bit of thunder, but I'm still going to talk about it. So I'm going to start on number 9 in the Hebrew. But the messenger Michael, while disputing with Hasatan because of the grave of Moshe, did not even curse him, but said to him, Hahadon condemns you. And been research on this, and Noel mentioned it, but Origen, which was a theologian, as well as Clement of Alexandria, Didymus the Blind, and others attribute this reference to the non-canonical Assumption of Moses book. In the story, Michael sought to bury Moses' body. The devil opposed the burial with the claim that he was Lord over the matter, and Moses was a murderer. Rather than assuming the right to condemn Satan for slander, Michael called the Lord to judge. So that's the summary I found on that. It's still hit or miss whether it's an exact, quote from the Assumption of Moses, but there's something. There could be something to it. So back to the Greek on number 9. Yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil. So that word contending is diokrinominos. Thank you for, I just butchered that. But it's used 4 additional times and means doubting. And I thought that was very interesting. So James 1:6, we'll talk about that next week. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Romans 14:23, but he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith, and whatever is not faith from sin. I just want to point out that, that's the same word as doubting. So it seems Moses was doubting a lot when contending with the devil. I thought that was interesting. But in the Hebrew, it says disputing. So, take that for what it's worth. But as far as the Greek's concerned, it appears Moses was doubting when he was, talking with the devil. Number 11, I'll read the Hebrew, and this is another 2 Peter cross reference time. So, and woe to them, for they are walking on the road of Cain and falling into the temptation of Balaam because of some prophet, and are being killed because of the dispute of Korach. So I guess I'll start off with that 2 Peter verse. So 2 Peter 3, you therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, be on your guard, so that you are not carried away by the error of unprincipled men, and fall from your own steadfastness. So it's linking the error of Balaam in the Greek with the error of invincible men. But then also walking on the road of Cain. So in the Greek it says gone in the way of Cain. But in the Hebrew, walking on the road of Cain. And I thought of the Shema during this part. So the Shema, Deuteronomy, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. So you can either walk along the road of Cain, or you can walk along the road of Yah, on the Most High. I thought that was interesting that the Hebrew went and said, walk on the road of Cain. Number 14, read the Hebrew, it says, and Hanok, the seventh from Adam, also prophesied about this and said, look, Ha-Hadon will come with thousands of thousands, 10,000s of set-apart ones. So I want to talk about that there's two sevenths from Adam. You know, everybody goes to Enoch, of course. He is the seventh from Adam. But there was also Lamech. Lamech was the seventh from Cain, like, you know, seventh on the Cain lineage. He's a shameful example of pride and ungodliness. And Enoch was the example of humility. Sorry. Lamech was the example of pride and, I said it correctly, pride and ungodliness, while Enoch was an example of humility and godliness. And they both lived in the same generation. So it just shows you the different paths you can take. And what happened to Enoch? He was taken. I also want to again point out that this says saints in the Greek and set apart ones in the Hebrew. So the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, while in the Hebrew it says set apart ones. Again, it made me think of the Matthew 24 post-trib verse. So it says Matthew 24:30, and the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from four winds. Saints and set apart ones, it's saying the Lord will cometh with his saints. Those are not angels, right? So is the Greek in Matthew 24 messengers, which they translated it as angels, or is it literal, the 144,000, the saints, or the set apart ones that are coming with the Lord? Or are they two events? Dun, dun, dun. I don't know. But First Enoch 1:9, and this is another, even, some seminary people will say that kind of accept Enoch, will say Jude was quoting Enoch at this verse. So First Enoch 1:9. So, and behold, he cometh with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all and destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness, which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So, take it or leave it. It could possibly be Jude's quoting from Enoch here. Three more, and then I'll be done. Number 18, I'll read the Hebrew. Then they said to you that in the last days there will be scoffers beside you who will walk after their desires. Here's my 2 Peter verse. 2 Peter 3:3. Know this first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts. Again, just summarizing that, there's this a lot of people who think that, that they use the same document, or it could be like what Noel said, that Jude and 2 Peter are very similar. Two more. Number 23, read both. And others say with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted by the flesh. In the Hebrew it says, indeed, some of you are with good deeds, but keep a distance from the sinners. It's very different from the Greek. It has nothing to do with fire. There's no garment spotted by the flesh. In the Hebrew it says, you're doing good deeds and keep a distance from sinners. I mean, that's total 180 there. Amos 4:11 says, I overthrew you as Yah overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And you were like a firebrand snatched from a blaze, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. So that more so of a cross-reference to the Greek, where it's talking about a fire blaze, like you're pulling them out. So he snatched you from the fire, yet you did not return to him, in Amos 4:11. And then finally, in number 24, I'm going to read the Greek this time. So it says, now unto him that is able to keep you from falling, and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory, and with exceeding joy. So Strong's word for joy, agalasia, used 2 other times in the New Testament. And it's awesome. This shows the joy we're going to be inheriting. So the first one would be in Luke 1:44. For behold, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy. That's John. That's the baby knowing that the Messiah was there, and he leaped in the womb for joy. That's amazing. And then the second part is Acts 2:44. This is the first century apostles, and those who had believed were together and had all things in common. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all, as anyone might have need, day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. They were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. That word gladness is the joy. So to summarize, the baby John leaping for joy when he first recognized the Messiah, and the first century apostles in Acts 2, that will be the same joy we feel when we're in his presence, as Jude 24 says. Hallelujah. That's what I got for Jude. Off to know.
All right. You had mentioned there, Michael, about walking on the road to Cain. And something that struck me there, let me read verse 11 again in the Greek. And it says, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain." Now that's, obviously none of us want to go in the way of Cain. But then look at what it says here in the Hebrew. "And woe unto them, for they are walking on the road of Cain." Well, I find that really fascinating, because what is that? When you think of Cain walking on the road, what do you guys visualize in your head? I hope everyone has realized by this point that Cain is attributed to being the first Freemason. And it's actually in the word Freemason, right? You have the freedom to go about and be a Mason from city to city. You can wander. In fact, Freemasons famously, especially if you rise to a certain rank, you can go visit any Freemason lodge in the world that you want. You are free as a Mason to go about and do so. A lot of people will say that Nimrod was the first Freemason, but it was clearly Cain. In fact, we've discussed in this group, and I believe I have pointed out, that in some extra biblical passages we have read has referred to Cain as the first Master Mahon, which is a kind of similar to Master Mason, but he was called Master Mahon, which is really interesting. So and what did he do? Cain went and built the first city. He wandered, he walked on the road, built the first city. Something to kind of think about there. I feel like that's a little bit of a jab at this whole secret society business of his own time. All right. That being said, I wanted to just throw that out there because I actually didn't really have that in my notes, but I wanted to say that before I forgot. All right. In verse 8, we see a big difference in the Greek and the Hebrew again. And actually, there's a passage that's completely gutted out. So apologies if Michael, if you already commented on this, or Rob. And it says in the Greek, likewise, also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh. This is, of course, going back in the homosexual theme of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is all, of course, completely removed from the Hebrew. Despise dominion and speak evil of dignities. Okay. Well, look at how it phrases it here in the Hebrew. And likewise, those who despise the authority and curse the kingship. Now, there is actually 2 times in this book that we see the word curse. There might be more. I counted 2. And neither one of them appear in the Greek, and they give a very different kind of take on this. So here's the thing about kingship. Within Hebrew society, within Torah, the kings of Yashar'el and YEHUDAH, the 2 houses, the northern and the southern kingdom, but one time under, of course, David and Solomon, they were united, but for the rest of the time they were split. They were believed to serve as Yahuwah's agents to rule the nation. They were kind of like a David was anointed. That's the word for where we get Messiah. He was anointed. He was Yahuwah's anointed over the kingdom. As such, they were expected to observe his covenants and laws, to defend the nation and engage in offensive war when deemed necessary. and to rule over the people with justice, of course, and righteousness. All right, so let's see here. I have a few verses. I don't know if I really want to turn to them. Here's one in Deuteronomy. Let's see if I can turn to this real quick. I didn't have it in front of me. Oh, okay. I don't have it in front of me. Oh, here it is. So let's see what we have here in Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 17. And it talks about the kingship. When you have come into the land that Yahuwah, your Elohim, is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set over you a king whom Yahuwah, your Elohim, will choose. One of your own community you may set as king over you. You are not permitted to put a foreigner over you who is not of your own community. Even so, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or return the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses. So he's not allowed to sell you back into slavery for his riches. Something that our kings have done to us. Since Yahuwah has said to you, you must never return that way again. And unfortunately, we have returned that way. And he must not acquire many wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Also, silver and gold he must not acquire in great quantity for himself, which kind of speaks against all the the kings and elites in this world. I think that disqualifies basically all of them. But it's kind of interesting here that to see that passage removed. Now, we see the same thing happen. The word curse comes up in the following verse 9. I lost it, so let's see if I can find it. There it is. And in the Greek, it says, yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moshe, durst not. I like that word, durst not. Bring him against him a railing accusation. So it's basically saying in the Greek that he did not accuse the accuser. However, that's completely missed. Got it out in the Hebrew, and it says that while disputing with Hasatan because of the grave of Moshe, did not even curse him so, but said to him, Adon condemns you. I was actually in a discussion recently with Dave, he's in here, about a couple of days ago about, people who curse others. And there are those, kind of, they come amongst our ranks into our community in and out, who feel that they are given the authority to actually put curses on other people. They will curse people in the name of Yahuwah. And so here we see twice in this letter that he says that we are not to curse the kingship, and that even the angels will not curse Hasatan. And I like that a lot better, because the thing is, it's like to accuse Satan. No, we don't want to go around and be the accuser, but Scripture does accuse him. It says he's a liar. He's a dirty, filthy liar. And that's an accusation. It accuses him of many different things, and one of which is that he accuses the set apart. So actually, I appreciate that a lot more. It for me, it pulls away the confusion. It's like, okay, it's completely different to state a fact that he lies about everything. And we went over that in our Revelation study. And the fact that, that we are not to curse him, right? Like, he's performing a job, his duty, and we're to let Yahuwah be the one to settle the score. So I like that a lot better. All right, let's see what else I have. I don't have a lot more notes on the last part of the chapter. I went over in verse 10, really earlier commentary about how we really see this idea of the 40 years in the wilderness being replayed in the thinking of this generation, that they were also like a 40-year generation, that, they had to get it right. And at the end of it, the Messiah was knocking at the door. He's coming swiftly. He's coming to judge, and he's some people didn't make the cut, just like the wilderness generation. What else do we have? Michael talked about the assumption of Moses. We talked about Cain. Okay, so this is something that is missing, and I also mentioned that I was sad about. Verse 13, we do not see the... verse 13 in the Greek says, describing these people as wandering stars. The word there, I believe, it's planet. Planets. He's actually calling people that are deceived planets, which is really interesting. To whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Now, that quote Where he's taking that from is actually the book of Enoch once again. I will point out, though, that that is actually gone from the Hebrew. I'm a little sad about that. Obviously, the guy who did translate this was probably also a fan of Enoch, and he's like, I think I'm going to put this little extra flourish in there. And this is where he's taking it from. Enoch chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. All who are in the heavens know what is transacted, that the heavenly luminaries change not their paths, that each rises and sets regularly, every one at its proper period, without transgressing the commands. And so the picture that is given in Enoch, I could say this is scriptural, because the command, the picture that is given in Enoch is that if a star were to become a planet, they were to become a wandering star by the very name, they would be transgressing the commands of YEHUDAH. So just think about this in the Copernican revolution, when we were taught that we lived on a planet. What are they actually telling us there? Think about that. It's really interesting. I mean, it's the intel community is constantly trying to break up families and make us Satan's always trying to make us unclean. Hopefully that wasn't a riling accusation there. I guess it was. But he's trying to make us unclean so he can accuse us. And they want us to believe we live on a wandering star, always transgressing the law of YEHUDAH. We also see in the Testament of Naphtali, which talks about the same thing. I'm going to read it really quickly here. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Be therefore not eager to corrupt your doings through covetousness or with vain words to beguile your souls. Because if ye keep silence in purity of heart, you shall understand how to fold fast the will of Elohim and to cast away the will of Beliar. That would be Hasatan. Sun and moon and stars change not their order. So do ye also change not the law of Elohim in the disorderliness of your doings. The Goyim, the Gentiles, went astray and forsook YEHUDAH and changed their order. So here, according to the Testament of Tali, it's saying if you call yourself a Gentile, according to Hebrew thinking, you have gone astray. You are not in covenant with YEHUDAH, and you've changed your order. You are a planet, a wandering star. You do not want. We hear about the wheat and the tares. You don't want to be a tare. We hear about the sheep and the goats. You don't want to be a goat. We hear about the stars and the planets. You don't want to be a planet. You want to be a star. You want to be fixed in your path. You want to obey the law of YEHUDAH. Anyways, all that to say, it's a little sad to see that go in this passage, but it's still thematically there, because I have pointed out Enoch does talk about it. In fact, there's a passage I don't have it in front of me, but Enoch goes to Gehenna, to the lake of fire, and he sees these huge mountains rolling around, and they're on flames. And he asks, what are those? And he found out those were stars that gave up their first estate, that they wandered. And because of their transgression, they're being punished in there. So that is obviously a scriptural theme. All right, what else do we have here? And as I pointed out, the good news is that Enoch is still quoted from in here, as Michael pointed out. Another thing that's interesting is that in verse 16, let's see what verse 16 says in the Hebrew. It's very different again than the Greek. I'm not going to take time to read the Greek, but here's what the Hebrew says. For there is no firmness in his mouth. Their inside is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Well, this actually is a quote from Psalm 5, verse 10. So that's kind of a fun little fact. We see in, as Michael pointed out, 2 Peter 3:3 is quoted in verses 17 through 18, so I won't go over that again. But here's one thing that I really like how he closes on. We see the whole family, the Holy Family at work, as described in verses 20 through 21. So let's read that together. But you, beloved brothers, strengthen yourselves in your faith by the Ruach HaKodesh. All right, so boom, right there we see the Ruach HaKodesh. And what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to strengthen ourselves in our faith by the Ruach. All right, and then he goes straight into, and stand in the love of YEHUDAH. Who's YEHUDAH? He's Elohim, the Most High Elohim of Yashar'el. He's our Heavenly Father. And his name is stripped out of the Greek. And I actually love this because whenever I talk to Christians all the time, they're like, "Oh no, Torah is like, that's not love. I believe in love. My God is love. Jesus is love." But here it says Yahuwah is love, and that's something that goes beyond the understanding of anyone who thinks his covenant is so awful and horrible. Like it's not, guys. It's not a burden. It is his. The yoke is easy. The burden is light. And Yahuwah is very loving to bring us into a covenant with him, to bring us into a marriage covenant. That is love. Like being adulterous and breaking that covenant is not loving, but he's not the one committing adultery on us. We're the ones that did it. All right. And then we see right after that, and the mercies of our Adon, Yeshua, for eternal life. So we see the Son here, and we see all throughout the Torah, and I'm not going to read the passages here, how Yahuwah is merciful. Well, we see right here, it is Yeshua, our salvation, that he is merciful. And that's why he is, of course, our Savior. So I really liked how that ended there. I have one more note. Let's see what's verse 24. Let's see what we got here. Oh, okay, so we see a big difference once again, presenting faultlessness in the Greek. Let's see what it says. Now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless. Okay, so that's the key phrase there. Present you faultless. Now, I think that the translation it's pretty close, but the thing is, with the whole sanctification and all these like doctrines we pushed in there, that how I was raised to read this is that I am faultless because Jesus on the cross. There's that famous that meme you guys have probably seen where like a salesman is slapping something, like maybe like COVID or something like that. He's like, he slaps and he's like, you could fit a lot of blah 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 into this fill in the blank. So I like to like pretend that he's slapping the cross. He's like, you could fit a lot of doctrine into this bad boy right here. And so there's a huge difference between the fact that that Yahusha is sinless, and therefore all my sin has been taken away, that he looks at me and he doesn't see any sin because he just looks at his Son, versus what it says in the Hebrew here. But he who is able to keep you without doubting and set you before Ha'adon without any sin. And what he's saying here is that we have just gone through this letter where he gives examples of all the people that sinned. They rebelled. You don't want to be Cain. You don't want to be Korah. You don't want to be the angels, the watchers that gave up their first estate to create the giant babies. You don't want to be those people. You want to be, an Enoch. You want to be a Moshe. You want to be a Yeshua, Joshua, as in Moshe, and you want to be these people. You want to be the people who were obedient, and they could be presenting to the Father as obedient and without sin. All right, so that is my closure on this book. We have probably a lot more to talk about, but I'm going to hand it back to Rob.
Excellent. Okay, you guys covered so much that I'll be probably short. A couple things I want to add to this is that verse 3, we see in the Hebrew, I found it needful to rebuke you by writing. So once again, I wanted to come back to that rebuking and warning to the brethren. I just want to emphasize that's what I believe YEHUDAH is doing here, is he's writing this to warn the brethren of these things, of what we just discussed. Verse 6, it says here, and also the messengers who sinned and were thrust down from above. And a lot of the thought is the angels fell from heaven, or that phrase, the fallen ones fall from heaven, etc. Well, here it points out they were thrust down, they were kicked out, they were forced down because they have sinned. So I just want to point that out as a good description. And then we see in verse 9 the grave of Moshe compared to the body of Moshe in the Greek. And also it says that he did not even curse him so, but said to him, Ha'adan condemns you. And we see the little note here that condemns you is punish you. So Michael's telling Hafatan that Ha'adan is going to punish you. So I think that is very telling. And also, I want to point out once again, I thought Noel hit it right on the head in talking about the 40 years and the 40 years, talking about here in verse 11 with the falling into temptation of Balaam, walking on that road of Cain. Thought that was excellent to bring up and thinking about for us as another reminder. Let's not fall into the temptations of Balaam, into the things of this world, to our desires, the things of the flesh. That's why it's talking about being set apart and focusing on Yah. And verse 16, we see here, for there is no firmness in his mouth. Okay, talking about he just finished talking about the judgment of the wicked ones because of their evil deeds. For there is no firmness in their mouth. And a couple verses up, we see that it's talking about the being like the waves of the sea, being wishy-washy. There's no firmness in the mouth. They change their stories. They change the perspective. There's no consistency. There's no truth in them. And so once again, we see that here as the personality of the wicked ones and evil ones and liars, etc. They're all over the place. There's no firmness in their mouth. There's no truth, and their inside is destruction. So what comes out of the mouth shows you what's on the inside there. And then verse 18, I'll touch on. In the last days there will scoffers beside you who will walk after their desires. Once again, their desires. So as we are walking in the light, we are to examine those around us who are teaching or sharing the word, the gospel, and we have to really examine them. Are they what's their intentions? Are they doing this in love and humility, or are they walking after their desires to gain something, whether it's notoriety, pride, fame, any of those things? So, once again, additional warnings. So I just want to end with, besides all of the commentary that was discussed on the differences here, my overview is that YEHUDAH is writing to us, giving us warning to stay strong in faith and being careful with the wicked ones that are all around and leading and or pushing people off the right path. And so let's keep our strengthen our faith and walk in purity and love. That's what I want to end with. And I'll pass it over to Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. That's all I have for Jude. We can open it up, or if no one wants to have closing comments.
Thus concludes our reading from the book of YEHUDAH. So it is now opened up. We are roundtabling this. Anybody else have any thoughts or observations on the book?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I have quite a few comments, and as I'm saying some of my comments, I'll drop some stuff in the post. So first is my standard comment about set apart. So everywhere you see set apart, actually the word in Hebrew is holy, kadosh, and of course, in certain, depending on the context, it could be sanctified, but the word is holy. Okay, so in verse 1 and 3 is talking about holy and holy ones. And then also, when you asked me to comment about the word that he used for the sent one. So actually, he's not saying sent one, he's saying shaliach, which shaliach is apostle, like the 12 apostles. So they are called shaliach, shlichim, okay? And you can also translate it as a messenger, okay? But not like a messenger in a way of like angels in the Bible. Sometimes they are messengers. Usually when you see shaliach, you know that it's like a human being, not necessarily a divine messenger like a malach, like an angel.
So you would say that the word would be best translated to apostle. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And also in verse 17, just so you can see, like it's so, in Hebrew, it's so, the difference is so subtle that you can miss it when you translate it. But in verse 17, he actually says sent ones, okay? Sent ones in plural. But in verse, I think either 1 or 3, he's actually saying apostle. Then verse 4.
Can you
Sorry.
can you clarify the difference then between the sent ones and, just so I'm clear, the sent ones in verse 17? What would the sent ones be implying?
So, in my opinion, many people could be sent ones, right? But the shaliach, the apostle, there are only like 12 of them. Like that's, I think that that's like a very special position. I mean, Yeshua handpicked them.
Well, right. So, it's probably Acts chapter 2 or 3, right in there. They discussed replacing Judas or Yehudah, and I know that Yaakov was in the qualification running there for that, on the basis that to be an apostle, according to them, there that you had to be with Yahusha from the beginning of his ministry to the end. So I know that's kind of interesting connection there, and something I'll be thinking about a lot. And I'll let, just to point this out too, for anyone who was there on Thursday when we read through the Gospel of Gamaliel, that was interesting as well, because it actually pitted Yaakov in the garden with Yahusha when he was betrayed, and it said that he fled with the others. So I find that really interesting, because it is backing up what Acts says, that he was there with him the whole time, even though the Gospels never really mention him.
Yeah, and right here is calling Yaakov Shaliach, basically Apostle James. That's what he's calling him.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then verse 4, he's in English it says condemnation, but actually in Hebrew it says punishment. So where is it? So written up for this condemnation, actually it's punishment, like they're going to be punished. I think punish, the word, at least in Hebrew, the word punish is way stronger than condemn. And then verse 6, it's angels, malachim. I would definitely stick to angels rather than just messengers. Then in verse 8 and verse 25, he's saying, and likewise those who despise the authority and curse the kingship. I just want you to know that in verse 8 and 25, he's not saying kingship, he's saying kingdom. I think there is a difference between kingship and kingdom.
That's That is a huge difference.
Exactly.
Would you think there that it's talking about the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of Yahusha, or what's the kingdom you think he's talking about?
I thought he's talking about the kingdom of Yahusha.
That's fascinating. Again,
Yeah. And then on verse 9, again, it's angel. And then instead of condemns, so they used present tense condemns, right? It's actually in Hebrew, it's a will punish. So that's the verse of Archangel Michael, basically counting on Yah that will punish Satan. Then in verse 5 he's mentioning Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, and in verse 7 he's mentioning Sodom, which is Sodom, and it reminded me of when we read the Hebrew Revelation chapter 11:8, where he says, and their corpses will be thrown on the plains of the set apart, or actually the holy city, which is called Sodom and Mitzrayim, because our Adon was crucified there. I don't know, it just brought that verse to my to the front of my mind, while I was reading. I thought it's interesting that John mentioned Mitzrayim and Sodom, and then Jude, YEHUDAH also does the same thing. Then on verse 11, so I must say that I almost stopped completely at verse 11. It took me forever to finish the chapter because verse 11 got me into a rabbit hole. So in verse 11 he's saying, and woe to them, for they are walking on the road of Cain and falling into the temptation of Balaam because of some prophets, and are being killed because of the dispute of Korach. So it really got me on a rabbit hole here, like, why Korach, okay? I could understand the first two, but Korach really got me. So I want to share a few of my thoughts on that verse. So I think this verse ultimately emphasizes, and I'll explain why, emphasizes that faith alone without obedience will not allow one to be sanctified / set apart, if that's what you like to call it, or holy. Okay, so Cain represents sins committed by men towards fellow men. Balaam represents sins committed by men towards Yah, right? Because he represents idolatry. Korach represents a whole plethora of sins. I mean, I can write at least a long article about, all the sins that are represented by what Korach did when he led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. He literally broke almost all of the 10 commandments in his rebellion. But for me, one of the biggest sins that Korach represented in his words here, and let me just drop this verse first in the post. So this is Numbers 16:3. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? If you start meditating on this verse, you will immediately hear voices of communists and fascists coming through, like everyone is equal, and no one will own anything and everyone will be happy, sort of like this. Needless to say that Korach was one of the richest men in the whole of the nation of Israel at the time. But he was basically leading people by selling them the story that everyone is holy. So in here, Korach is insinuating that all the Israelites are automatically considered holy just because they all experienced the Exodus and they all witnessed the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. This statement is in complete and utter opposition to Yah's directive. And I want to show you the opposite verse to this. It's from Leviticus. I just dropped it, Leviticus 19:2. In this verse, Yah tells Moses, "Speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be," not you are always, you are already holy, of course, yeah, you are holy because, I love you. No, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Okay, so he's talking about future tense, meaning you need to work your way to become holy. And then he follows up the whole of chapter 19. Once he says you shall be holy, he explains how we are going to be holy, okay? It's a chapter full of commandments, ending with the following verse, okay? So when he ends explaining all the commandments and how we can be holy, okay, the last verse 37 says, "Therefore you shall observe all my statutes and all my judgments and perform them. I am the Lord." So basically, for me, the statement of Korach telling Moshe and Aaron, everyone is already holy, is in complete opposition to what Yah is saying. You need to observe all of my statutes and all of my judgments, and only then you may become holy. And I think this is what Jude, it's kind of like this letter is like, in my opinion, is like a cliff note to people that are already well versed with the Torah and with Yeshua's teachings. And the cliff note is, remember Korach? Remember what he did? Okay, don't go in his way. Don't follow his example. Holiness is not something that is granted quickly and easily without obedience and work. So that's kind of like, I got a little bit passionate about it because I really talk a lot about the rebellion of Korach. It represents a lot of stuff. And the last thing I wanted to say is on verse 18. Verse 18 actually was a little bit amusing reading it in Hebrew. So he is, in English, he says, "In the last days there will be scoffers besides you who will walk after their desires." In Hebrew, he's actually using a funny word. He's saying clowns. Like he's literally calling these people clowns. So he's saying, in the last days there will be clowns around you who will walk after their desires. And that reminded me of a verse from Proverbs. And I'm going to drop that verse in the post. And that verse says, "How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers," actually he's using the same word that Jude is using, "silly ones, clowns, delight in mockery or silliness, and fools hate knowledge." So I think it kind of like all ties up together with everything that all of us saw in this little letter. And I think that this letter is really all about realizing that faith without works and obedience is empty and meaningless. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's spot on. And, again, I say this a lot, but it's true. I mean, growing up in the church, I was not taught this stuff. They did not spend time in Torah, the Old Testament. We would read like the prophets if it was pointing towards, Messiah or whatever. But like Korah should cause everybody to Balaam as well, but Korah should cause everyone to pause and perhaps reevaluate our lives and maybe even shiver and repent, because like that was serious. Like if it's just really odd that Yah, the Most High, would be like, yeah, like I'm putting down this rebellion. I'm killing all of you guys who rebelled against me. But it's too bad, Korah, you weren't born a couple thousand years later or 1,000 years later, because that it's all going away at this point. You were just born in the wrong generation, and yeah, that's all I have to say about that, I guess. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this chapter?
I do have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask if anyone saw anything or heard anything new or I wanted to share, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary.
Sure. So yeah, in verse 9, and I know you guys mentioned, everyone talked about this, but verse 9 where it talks about trying to find it now, that Michael, he didn't even curse Satan, but he said, Adon condemns you. It did remind me of, I think it's Ascension of Moses, and I was trying to find it here now, but I couldn't find it. But I remember a book club reading from Zen, and I think they read through that, and it was over it was like Hasatan was accusing him because of that he killed somebody, and there was a dispute over that. And then what stood out to me was that Michael didn't condemn him, but he said, Hadon, or I think it was YEHUDAH condemn you, something like that. Also reminded me that happened another time, and it's in one of the books of Adam and Eve, where Satan came and like set to fire the cave. I don't know if it was the Cave of Treasures book or something like that, but he set to fire the cave, and there was an angel who was sent to keep the fire from burning the cave, but it said that the angel was not able to do anything else because he didn't have the authority. He just said, like, may YEHUDAH can condemn you, or may YEHUDAH curse you, something like that. Like, he didn't have the authority. It just, and I think Yahusha, the word, it said, had to come and like pretty much kick Satan out. So to me, it sounds like a rank kind of thing. Like, we have armies and we have ranks. Like, you have generals that you just fall in rank. And so I don't know if Satan still has some kind of rank, and people that are not in that rank don't have the authority. And obviously we have authority over our own lives, and we can take authority of that. But as far as further than that, I just wonder if it's kind of a rank thing. And looking at the other verses in the chapters, and when Roni was talking about the rebellion of Korah, I think that was kind of a rank thing also. Moshe was there. He had the authority from YEHUDAH, and they were kind of stepping up against that. And then we see what happened to them. But that's kind of what it seems like. And I kind of see that happening even around now, even from like, we have the outwardly bad people. If you look at like the left versus the right, the left looks outwardly bad and then the right looks good, but they're kind of two, I think I look at them like two wings of the same bird. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but and I don't think that we as in the flesh will have authority over that. I think that's kind of a bigger thing that will be handled by Yahusha himself. But anyways, I kind of all kind of tied in from that verse 9. So those were kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up, because Michael and I think it was when we were doing Yochanan, we had talked about, I can't remember which chapter it was, but brought up where the angels are sent out, and they're sent out for, from what I understand, the way, I can't remember which book I was reading this in, or where we pulled this from. They're sent out with a task to do, and specifically that task, and nothing much more than that. And so it brings to that point where you mentioned that they put out the fire, but that's what he was there to do, but not do anything more. So I believe there is something to that, that they are dispatched for certain orders, and they are to carry them out in obedience. But anything more that they may do may be going outside their instructions, which can then more or less put them in contempt due to them meddling with, the things of this world, which maybe they should not be doing so without authority. So that's something to think about.
All right, guys, give you another moment to make any comments or even ask questions or anything else you have, or forever hold your peace.
So, sorry, it's me again. So I do have actually a question for you guys on verse 6, where it's asking, and I don't know if Ronit maybe has any insight on the Hebrew word for here, but where it says they are talking about the messengers who sinned and were thrust down from above. They are being hidden in darkness until the future day of judgment. Do you think that he was referring to the future day of judgment, which would have happened then with the destruction of the temple and, Yahusha's coming before the millennial kingdom? Or do you think that future day of judgment, because he said future day, not like soon to come, I don't know, judgment, but do you think that's for like now, like the end? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is that he's talking about most likely he contextually he's talking about Enoch, and so he's talking about the Watchers, and now as there were 200 of them, one of them was Azazel, and he was judged differently than the other 199. He specifically was never being released. He was going to be locked up forever and just thrust straight into the fire. But the others, the other Samjaza and the other 199, they appear to be released eventually. But when it happens, it is very close to they are also going to be judged and thrown in the lake of fire. But for whatever reason, they appear to be released. And we see that they talk about 70 generations. There's a lot of questions about what these 70 generations are. Are they 70 jubilees? 70, what is a generation? How many years? So on and so forth. And this is what I talked about with the timeline, looking at Enoch's 10-week calendar. Some people would say it's only 7 weeks, that they added on 3. But according to the 10 weeks, you see that the Watchers are actually released after the kingdom of Messiah. And they appear to be released with you never see I've yet to see a connection. Like, for example, in Enoch, it never says that Hasatan will be thrown in prison, but it just says the Watchers will be released, and it's going to be at the very end of the last week that they're released, and then they are on the earth for a little bit of time, for whatever reason, and then they're thrown into like fire. And so you see the same thing with Hasatan, right? That he is thrown in prison and then he's released for a short season or for a short time to go about and deceive. So that's what I think about. I think that the Watchers have been released and that they're coming up on their judgment really quickly. So that's my 2 cents.
I would be mostly in alignment with that.
Same.
Mostly, you're not 100% on board. It's okay.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking on that is if we're talking about specifically to Watchers, as you're talking about, yeah, I'm on board with that. But if you're talking about others, then I think it could fall in. There was judgment done to them, prior to the end. I think that was the question. So yeah, I'm good with that.
Plus, there's judgment for what they did, which is what you were talking about thrown in, and it's 70 times 70. Some people estimate, and then there's the eternal judgment, which we all, have to face, and that's what you described in Revelation 20. It's just we'll be, Lord willing, resurrected, to the everlasting life while they'll be thrown in. So I don't know which judgment it's talking about there.
Yeah, we see the Watchers being released for the short season, if you will, and also we read in Daniel where it talks about the Dominion will have a short time at the end too. So you're seeing the Watchers and the former regime Dominion rising up, and so that's what I see happening now, with such a delusion that is going on for us who can see. It's just amazing, the mass delusion over this world, what's taking place, and it's very difficult to see through if you are not a seeker of truth and a lover of Yah. In that sense, you've got to be both, in that because it does mention those who seek the truth. We read that in Yochanan specifically, regarding those seeking truth.
No, do you agree with what Leah's talking about in chat?
She asked 1 week is equal to 700 years. Okay. So here's my thing on that. When I did that paper that I then read into the video, the 7,000 year timeline deception, which is probably it's quickly escalating. It'll probably be 100,000 view video. I spent a couple days like almost pulling my hair out, just with a calculator, trying to line up Enoch's weeks with anything historical. I tried the LXX, the Masoretic. I tried each week equating 1,000, each week equating 700, and I couldn't get anything. I couldn't get anything exact. And I like the idea of 700 years. Abstractly, but then if I try to put it, if I try to line it up with biblical dates as we're told and all that kind of stuff, it's not perfect. So I would like to think that there are exact years. Sometimes I've kind of just described them as epochs, meaning that it's a segment of time. There was a segment of time in the first week, a segment of time in the second week, a segment of time the third week. And the thing about Enoch's weeks is that he tells us the events of where they begin and end. So you could at least line that up. You could go, okay, the flood ends the second week, which, by the way, according to the LXX, was like the year 2200 after creation or something in that ballpark. So we're already 700 years off. That would be the flood would end the third week if we're going 700 years. It doesn't even line up with the 1,000 years. It's over 2,000 years. So again, there's nothing perfect on that I have seen. If there's probably much brighter minds out there who could crunch the numbers and figure it out.